The goblet fell from Lord Alaric Fenwick's hand and shattered against the marble floor, and within seconds, the great hall of Ravenswood Castle fell into complete silence. Wine spread across the stone like a dark red stain, and Alaric's face turned pale as he gripped his throat and staggered backward into the arms of two startled guards. Musicians stopped mid-note. Dancers froze where they stood. Somewhere near the back of the hall, a woman screamed, and that scream seemed to break the spell that had held everyone still, because in the next moment, the entire room surged into chaos. Duke Edmund Hartley pushed through the crowd of nobles and servants, his heart pounding harder than it ever had on any battlefield. He had returned from the war only 3 days earlier, and this feast had been arranged to celebrate his homecoming and to honor the alliance between his house and the House of Fenwick. Now that alliance was choking on the floor in front of 200 witnesses. "Someone fetch the physician," Edmund shouted, dropping to his knees beside Alaric. The Lord's lips had turned a strange shade of blue, and sweat poured down his forehead, even though the hall was cool. "Alaric, look at me. Stay with me." Alaric's eyes rolled back, and for a moment Edmund feared the worst. But then the physician arrived, a thin, quick man named Osric who had served the Hartley family for 20 years, and he forced something down Alaric's throat that made the Lord cough violently and vomit onto the floor. Slowly, painfully, the color began to return to his face, though he remained too weak to stand. "He will live," Osric said, wiping his hands on a cloth. "But only because we caught it in time. Another few minutes and no power on earth could have saved him." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Edmund stood, his own hands trembling slightly, and looked around at the sea of frightened faces. Somewhere in this hall, someone had tried to kill a guest under his own roof, during a feast meant to celebrate peace and friendship. The thought made his stomach turn. "Bring me the steward who poured the wine," Edmund said, his voice carrying an authority that silenced the last of the whispers. A young man named Aldous was brought forward, shaking so badly that he could barely stand upright. He was perhaps 20 years old, with the kind of honest, frightened face that made it hard to imagine him capable of harming anyone. "I swear before every saint, my lord, I did nothing wrong," Aldous said, dropping to his knees. "I poured from the same barrel that served every table tonight. I do not understand how this happened." Edmund studied the young steward carefully. Fear alone did not prove guilt, but it did not prove innocence either. "Where is that barrel now?" "In the cellar, my lord, where it has always been." Edmund ordered 2 guards to seal the wine cellar immediately, and to allow no one inside until it could be properly searched. As the guards hurried off, Chancellor Godfrey Pruitt approached, his long robes sweeping across the floor, his expression carefully arranged into one of grave concern, though something in his eyes suggested he was already forming conclusions of his own. "My Lord Duke," Godfrey said, bowing slightly, "this is a terrible night, but I fear the truth may be closer than we think. Speak plainly, Godfrey. This is no time for riddles." Several of the household staff mentioned that they saw the Duchess near the wine cellar earlier this evening, before the feast began. She was alone, and she stayed longer than one would expect for a simple errand. Edmund felt something cold settle in his chest. "My wife often visits the cellar to check on supplies for the household. That is her duty as mistress of this castle." "Of course, my lord. I only report what was seen. I do not accuse anyone." Godfrey's tone was smooth, almost gentle, but the words had already done their damage. Around them, nobles who had overheard began whispering to one another, and Edmund could see suspicion spreading through the hall like the wine spreading across the floor. Edmund searched the crowd until he found her. Duchess Eleanor Hartley stood near one of the tall windows, her pale blue gown catching the candlelight, her face calm in a way that seemed strange given the panic around her. She had always possessed a quiet, composed nature, the kind that some mistook for coldness and others admired as strength. Tonight, that same composure would work against her. Edmund crossed the hall to stand before his wife. "Eleanor, tell me what Godfrey says is not what it sounds like." Eleanor met his eyes without flinching. "I did go to the cellar this evening. I wanted to be certain the good wine was set aside for tonight's feast, since Alaric was our guest of honor. I have done this before every important gathering since we married." "You were alone?" "The cellar keeper had already gone to help prepare the hall. I checked the barrels myself and left. That is all." Her answer was simple and reasonable, yet Edmund noticed how many eyes were fixed upon them, how many ears strained to catch every word. He loved his wife, He had loved her since the day they were wed, 5 years earlier, when she had been a shy young woman from a modest but respected family, and he, a young lord, eager to build a life beside someone he could trust completely. In all that time, he had never once doubted her character. But tonight, exhausted from months of war, his mind clouded with the shock of nearly losing an ally to poison, Edmund felt a small, unwelcome seed of doubt take root. He hated himself for it even as it grew. "I believe you," he said, though his voice lacked its usual certainty. "But others may not be so quick to accept your word. We must find who truly did this, and quickly, before rumors turn into something worse." Eleanor's expression did not change, but something in her eyes flickered, a brief shadow of hurt that vanished almost as soon as it appeared. "Then let us find the truth together, Edmund." He nodded, but even as he did, Godfrey was already speaking quietly, with a cluster of nobles nearby, his voice too low for Edmund to hear the exact words, though the glances thrown toward Eleanor made the subject plain enough. The guards returned from the cellar within the hour, carrying the barrel in question, along with several jars and vials they claimed to have found hidden behind a stack of crates. Osric the physician examined the residue in one small vial and confirmed grimly that it matched the poison found in Alaric's cup. "Where exactly were these hidden?" Edmund asked. "Behind the third row of crates, my lord, close to where the Duchess is said to have been standing," the guard captain, Roland Finch, replied. He was a serious man, not given to exaggeration, and his words carried weight because of it. The crowd's murmurs grew louder. Edmund raised a hand for silence. "Finding something near a place does not prove who placed it there. This castle employs dozens of servants, and any one of them could pass through that cellar without notice." "Of course, my lord," Godfrey said smoothly. "Yet caution would serve us well tonight, perhaps, for her own safety, and for the peace of the household. The Duchess might remain in her chambers until matters are clearer." Edmund wanted to refuse. Every instinct told him that confining his wife, even gently, would be seen by the entire court as an admission of guilt. Yet Alaric Fenwick's family were powerful allies, and if word spread that the Duke had ignored clear evidence to protect his own wife, the consequences could shatter years of careful diplomacy. He looked at Eleanor, silently pleading with her to understand what he was about to do, and why. "Eleanor," he said quietly, "for tonight, I ask that you remain in the West Tower, under guard, until we can clear this matter properly, not as a prisoner, as a precaution." Something passed across her face, quick and sharp, gone before anyone else could notice it. She lifted her chin. "If that is what you believe is necessary, Edmund, then I will go." She turned and walked toward the tower stairs without another word, her back straight, her steps steady, though Edmund thought he saw her hands trembling slightly at her sides. He wanted to call after her, to say something that would ease the wound he had just opened, but the words would not come, and the moment passed. Behind him, Godfrey Pruitt allowed himself the faintest smile, one that vanished so quickly that no one else in the hall noticed it at all. The rest of the feast dissolved into confusion. Guests departed in hushed groups, whispering theories to one another as they gathered their cloaks. Alaric Fenwick, still weak but recovering, was carried to a guest chamber where Osric could watch over him through the night. Servants scrubbed the wine from the floor, though the stains seemed to linger in everyone's memory long after the marble had been cleaned. Edmund remained in the great hall long after the last guest had gone, staring at the spot where the goblet had fallen. He thought of the years he and Eleanor had shared, the quiet mornings, the letters she had written him every week while he was away at war, each one filled with small details of home meant to comfort him during the long months of fighting. He thought of her steady hands and her careful mind, and he could not reconcile the woman he knew with the accusation now hanging over her. Yet he also could not ignore what Godfrey had reported, nor the vials found so close to where she had stood. Someone in this castle had tried to kill a guest tonight, and until the truth was uncovered, suspicion would cling to anyone who could not prove otherwise. He climbed the stairs to his own chambers slowly, his mind heavy with unanswered questions. Passing the corridor that led to the West Tower, he paused, listening. No sound came from behind the guarded door. He almost turned to go to her, to offer some word of comfort, but stopped himself, uncertain of what he would even say. Was he protecting her or failing her? He could not yet tell. Far below, in the shadows near the kitchen entrance, A figure lingered longer than any servant should have, watching the guards take their positions outside the tower stairs. When he was satisfied that no one had noticed him, Lord Cedric Ashby slipped quietly out through the servants' door and into the cold night air, a thin, satisfied smile crossing his face, before he disappeared into the darkness beyond the castle walls. Edmund did not sleep that night. He sat by the window of his chamber, staring out at the moonlit courtyard, replaying every moment of the evening in his mind, searching for some detail he might have missed, some proof that would settle the doubt twisting inside him. He thought of Eleanor's calm voice, her steady eyes, and the flicker of hurt she had tried so hard to hide. Whatever the truth turned out to be, Edmund knew that the coming days would test not only his household, but his own heart, in ways he had never faced before, not even on the battlefields where he had earned his reputation as a fair and honorable man. By morning, word of the poisoning had spread through every corner of Ravenswood Castle, and by midday it had traveled far beyond the castle walls into the surrounding village. Servants spoke of it in hushed voices while drawing water from the well. Merchants who had delivered goods that morning carried the story into town, where it grew larger and stranger with every retelling. By the time the sun reached its highest point, half the countryside believed that the Duchess of Ravenswood had tried to murder a visiting lord out of jealousy, though not one person repeating the tale had witnessed a single moment of the actual event. Inside the castle, Chancellor Godfrey Pruitt moved through the halls with quiet purpose, speaking to this noble and that servant, always careful to frame his words as concern rather than accusation. He visited the kitchens, where he spoke with a cook named Wilhelmina about the arrangement of the feast. He spoke with two young maids who had helped prepare the wine service, guiding their memories gently until they recalled, with growing confidence, that they too had seen the Duchess lingering near the cellar stairs longer than usual. "I only wish to understand what happened," Godfrey told them each time, his voice soft and reasonable. "No one accuses the Duchess of anything. We simply must gather every detail, so that the truth, whatever it may be, can be known clearly." Yet each conversation left behind a stronger impression of guilt than the one before it, and Godfrey knew this well. He had spent many years at court, learning how suspicion could be planted like a seed, watered by careful words, and left to grow on its own, without any need for further tending. In the West Tower, Eleanor sat by the narrow window of her chamber, watching the courtyard below, where guards moved about their duties, as though nothing unusual had occurred. She had been given a comfortable room, with a soft bed and a small writing desk, and she had not been treated unkindly by the two guards stationed outside her door. Yet the door remained locked from the outside, and that single fact colored every hour of her confinement with a quiet, persistent ache. She thought of Edmund, of the uncertainty she had seen flicker across his face the previous night, and she understood, in a distant, painful way, why he had made the choice he did. He was still new to peace after months of war, still adjusting to the weight of leadership after so long spent following orders rather than giving them. The pressure from Godfrey and the assembled nobles must have felt enormous. Still, understanding his reasons did not soften the sting of being treated as a stranger in her own home. A soft knock came at the door, followed by the sound of a key turning in the lock. Margaret, a young maid who had served Eleanor since she first arrived at Ravenswood as a bride, entered carrying a tray of food and a small stack of clean linens. "My lady," Margaret said quietly, setting the tray down on the writing desk, "I brought your breakfast, though I fear it has grown cold on the way up." "Thank you, Margaret. I care little for the temperature of the bread this morning." Margaret hesitated, glancing back toward the door, before speaking again in a lower voice. "My lady, the whole castle speaks of nothing else. They say terrible things, things I know cannot be true." Eleanor managed a small, tired smile. "And what do you believe, Margaret?" "I believe you would never harm anyone, my lady. I have served you for 3 years, and I have never once seen unkindness in you, not even toward those who deserved it far more than Lord Fenwick." The simple loyalty in Margaret's words brought unexpected warmth to Eleanor's chest, though it did little to ease the deeper worry gnawing at her thoughts. "Margaret, I must ask something of you, and I need you to listen carefully." "Of course, my lady. Do you remember several days ago, before any of the guests arrived for the feast, when I asked you to carry a note down to the kitchens?" Margaret's brow furrowed in thought. "I remember you writing something at this very desk, my lady, though I confess I did not read it myself. You asked me to give it to the wine steward directly. Yes. I had noticed something troubling near the cellar entrance one evening, while walking the halls after supper. A stranger, someone I did not recognize as belonging to our household, standing near the door that leads down to the wine stores. It struck me as unusual enough that I wrote a note to Aldous, warning him to check the barrels carefully before serving them at the feast, and to report anything unusual to the guard captain. Margaret's eyes widened. My lady, if such a note exists, surely it would prove that you suspected danger before the poisoning ever happened. Why did you not speak of this last night, when the accusations began? Eleanor sighed and looked toward the window once more. Everything happened so quickly, Margaret. Alaric collapsed, the hall erupted into chaos, and by the time Godfrey made his claims, my mind was consumed with worry for Alaric's life and confusion over what was occurring. The note did not come to my thoughts until this morning, once the shock had begun to fade. Then we must tell someone at once. I fear it may not be so simple. The note was written for Aldous, not kept as evidence for myself. I do not even know if he still has it, or if he understood its meaning at the time. Eleanor pressed her hands together in her lap. And even if it were found, who would believe that I did not write it merely to protect myself after the fact, now that suspicion has already fallen upon me? Margaret considered this, her young face troubled. Then perhaps proof must come from elsewhere. Perhaps the stranger you saw can still be identified, or perhaps Aldous remembers receiving the note and can speak of it honestly. Perhaps, Eleanor said softly, though hope felt like a fragile thing to hold on to within these locked walls. Meanwhile, in the guest chamber, where he continued to recover, Lord Alaric Fenwick lay propped against a stack of pillows, his strength slowly returning under the careful attention of the physician Osric. Though weak, his mind remained sharp, and he had been turning over the events of the previous night with growing unease. Something troubles you, my lord, Osric observed, checking the pulse at Alaric's wrist. I keep returning to the moment before I drank, Alaric said slowly. The steward, young Aldous, seemed nervous as he poured my cup, more nervous than the occasion alone would explain. I assumed it was simply the pressure of serving so many important guests, but now, I wonder if he suspected something even then. You believe the steward knew the wine was tainted? I do not know what I believe yet, but something in his manner has stayed with me since I regained my senses, and I intend to speak with him myself once I have the strength to leave this bed. Osric nodded thoughtfully. The Duke has ordered no one to disturb the investigation without his knowledge, but perhaps I can arrange a quiet word between you and the steward, once you are strong enough to walk the halls without collapsing again. I would be grateful for that, Osric. Something about this entire affair does not sit easily within me, and I do not believe the Duchess is the answer everyone seems so eager to accept. Downstairs, Duke Edmund Hartley met with Captain Roland Finch in the small study adjoining the Great Hall, poring over the details gathered so far. The vials found in the cellar had been examined closely, and Osric confirmed that the poison used was a rare substance, not easily obtained by common servants, requiring both knowledge and access to acquire. This troubles me greatly, Edmund said, rubbing his tired eyes. If the poison is as rare as Osric claims, then whoever placed it in that cellar either traveled some distance to obtain it, or already possessed connections capable of supplying such a thing. The Duchess has traveled little since your marriage, my lord, Roland said carefully. Her connections remain largely within this household, and her family's modest estate. Then perhaps that argues in her favor rather than against her, Edmund replied, though he could hear the uncertainty still lingering in his own voice. Who among our guests or household might possess such connections? Roland hesitated before answering. Lord Cedric Ashby arrived only 2 days before the feast, my lord, and he has traveled extensively through the southern territories, where such rare substances are said to be more easily found. I do not accuse him, only note the possibility, as you ask me to consider every angle. Edmund frowned, turning the name over in his mind. Cedric Ashby was a distant relation of Alaric Fenwick's family, and his presence at the feast had seemed a natural courtesy extended to a guest's traveling companion. Edmund had exchanged only a handful of polite words with the man throughout the entire evening, and knew little of his character beyond a pleasant, if somewhat distant, manner. Keep a discreet watch on Lord Ashby, Edmund instructed. Say nothing to alarm him, but note his movements carefully. And send word to the cellar keeper. I wish to speak with the wine steward myself before the day ends. As Roland departed to carry out these instructions, Edmund sat alone in the study, staring at the small collection of vials laid out upon the table before him. Somewhere within this tangled web of suspicion and fear, the truth waited to be uncovered, and he intended to find it, no matter how long the search required, or how uncomfortable the answers might prove to be. Yet even as he resolved to seek justice with a clear and steady mind, the weight of his wife's confinement pressed heavily upon his conscience, a quiet reminder that every hour spent chasing shadows was an hour she remained locked away, waiting for a husband she trusted to prove her innocence before the world could condemn her completely. Aldous stood before the Duke with his hands clasped tightly in front of him, his knuckles pale from the pressure of his own grip. He had been summoned to the small study only moments earlier, and the walk from the kitchens had felt longer than any journey he had ever taken, though it covered barely the length of 2 corridors. "My lord," Aldous said, bowing low, "I have told the truth already. I do not know how the poison came to be in that barrel." "I did not summon you to repeat what you have already said," Edmund replied, his tone measured but firm. "I wish to ask about something else entirely. Think carefully before you answer. Did anyone give you a note in the days before the feast, warning you to inspect the wine more closely than usual?" Aldous blinked, clearly caught off guard by the question. His mouth opened, then closed again, and Edmund watched him carefully, searching for any sign of deception in the young man's face. "A note, my lord?" "Yes. A written warning, perhaps delivered by a maid, on behalf of someone in the household." Slowly, understanding dawned across Aldous' features, followed almost immediately by something that looked like relief, mixed with fresh anxiety. "My lord, I did receive such a note, several days before the feast. I did not think of it again until this very moment, with everything that has happened since." Edmund leaned forward slightly. "Tell me exactly what it said, and who delivered it." "A young maid brought it to me in the cellar, my lord. I did not know her well, though I have seen her about the castle, serving in the Duchess's chambers. The note warned me to check the wine barrels carefully before the feast, and mentioned that someone had noticed a stranger lingering near the cellar entrance one evening. I confess, my lord, I read it quickly and set it aside, thinking it a small caution among many such warnings that pass through this household before any grand occasion. I did check the barrels the following morning, as instructed, and found nothing amiss at that time. Do you still possess this note?" Aldous' face fell. "I fear not, my lord. I kept it tucked inside my apron for a day or two, meaning to mention it to Captain Finch, but in the business of preparing for so many guests, I believe it must have fallen out, or been discarded along with other scraps. I did not think it important enough to guard carefully, not until now." Edmund sat back, frustration tightening his jaw. Without the note itself, Aldous' word alone would carry little weight against the mounting suspicion already directed toward Eleanor. Yet the detail about the stranger near the cellar matched exactly what Eleanor had described to Margaret, a fact Edmund did not yet know, since Margaret had not found the opportunity to relay the conversation to anyone beyond the locked door of the West Tower. "Describe this maid who delivered the note," Edmund said, "as precisely as you are able." Aldous frowned in concentration. "Young, my lord, with light brown hair and a quiet manner. I believe her name may have been Margaret, though I cannot say with certainty. She serves within the household regularly, and I have seen her carrying messages before on behalf of the Duchess." Edmund felt something shift within him, a small crack forming in the wall of doubt that had built up since the previous night. If Margaret could confirm the existence of this note and the warning it contained, it would lend real weight to Eleanor's claim that she had suspected danger before the feast, rather than causing it herself. "You are dismissed, Aldous, but remain within the castle grounds. I may need to speak with you again." Once the young steward had gone, Edmund summoned Captain Finch immediately, and relayed what he had learned. Roland listened carefully, his expression thoughtful. "If this maid Margaret can confirm the note's existence, my lord, it would certainly complicate the case Godfrey has been building against the Duchess. Shall I bring her here for questioning?" "Yes, at once. And Roland, keep this matter quiet for now. I do not wish Godfrey or anyone else influencing her memory before I have the chance to hear her account directly." Roland departed swiftly, and within the hour, Margaret stood nervously before the Duke, her hands twisting the fabric of her apron as she waited to be addressed. Edmund studied her for a long moment before speaking, remembering Aldous' description and finding it matched well enough. "Margaret, I understand you have served my wife faithfully for some years." Yes, my lord. 3 years this coming autumn. I wish to ask you about a note. Did the Duchess ever give you a note to deliver to the wine steward in the days before the feast? Margaret's eyes widened, and for a moment, Edmund feared she might deny all knowledge out of fear. But instead, her expression filled with something closer to hope. Yes, my lord. I remember it clearly. The Duchess wrote something at her desk one evening, and asked me to carry it down to Aldous directly, saying it was important that he receive it before the feast preparations began. Did you read the note yourself? No, my lord. It was folded, and I did not think it my place to look inside. But the Duchess mentioned to me, only this very morning, when I brought her breakfast, that she had seen a stranger near the cellar entrance one evening, and had written to warn Aldous of it. Edmund felt his pulse quicken. Margaret's account matched Aldous' description precisely, down to the mention of a stranger near the cellar, a detail Margaret could not have known, unless Eleanor had indeed spoken to her about it that very morning, well before Edmund had questioned either the steward or the maid. The pieces were beginning to align in a way that suggested truth rather than convenient invention. Margaret, listen carefully. This information may prove vital in clearing your mistress's name. I need you to think back and tell me anything else you recall about that evening, or about the stranger the Duchess mentioned. Margaret hesitated, her brow furrowing in concentration. My lady did not describe him in great detail, my lord, only that he wore a traveling cloak unfamiliar to her, and that he seemed to be watching the cellar entrance rather than simply passing by it. She said it struck her as odd enough to warrant caution, though she did not wish to raise alarm without more certain knowledge. Edmund thanked Margaret and instructed her to return to her duties, though he asked that she remain available should further questions arise. Once alone with Roland again, he allowed himself a long breath, the first moment of genuine hope he had felt since the feast had turned to chaos. This changes matters considerably, my lord, Roland said. If the Duchess warned the steward of a stranger near the cellar before any poisoning occurred, it strongly suggests she was attempting to prevent harm, not cause it. Yet we still lack the note itself, and Godfrey will surely argue that words alone, spoken after the fact, prove nothing definite. Edmund replied. We must find stronger evidence. Have you learned anything more of Lord Ashby's movements? Roland's expression grew serious. I have, my lord, though I hesitate to speak with certainty. One of the stable hands mentioned that Lord Ashby's servant made an unusual journey into the village 2 nights before the feast, claiming to purchase supplies, though he returned with nothing visible in his possession. I have not yet confirmed where he traveled or what business he conducted. Find out, quietly but swiftly. If Ashby's household obtained the poison before the feast, we may finally uncover the truth behind this entire affair. As Roland departed once more to continue his discreet investigation, Edmund remained alone in the study, staring at the small stack of notes he had begun keeping, to track every detail uncovered so far. The picture forming before him grew more complicated with each new piece of information, yet a clearer shape was beginning to emerge from the confusion, one that pointed away from his wife and towards something far more calculated. He thought of Eleanor, locked away in the West Tower, unaware that her husband had begun to find threads of truth that might soon set her free. Guilt gnawed at him for not visiting her sooner, for allowing pride and pressure to keep him from her side during the most difficult hours of her life. He resolved that once the day's investigation had run its course, he would go to her himself, regardless of what the court or Godfrey might think of such a visit. Yet even as this resolve settled within him, a servant burst into the study without knocking, breathless and pale with alarm. My lord, the servant gasped, you must come quickly. Lord Fenwick has taken a sudden turn for the worse, and Osric fears the poison may have done deeper harm than first believed. Edmund's newfound hope curdled instantly into fresh dread as he hurried from the study, his mind racing with the sudden fear that the true poisoner, whoever they were, might not yet be finished with their deadly work. Edmund reached the guest chamber to find Osric bent over Alaric Fenwick's bed, pressing a damp cloth against the lord's forehead, while the patient shivered beneath a heavy blanket, despite the warmth of the room. Alaric's breathing came in short, uneven gasps, and sweat had soaked through the linen of his nightshirt. What has happened? Edmund demanded, moving quickly to the bedside. A fever took hold suddenly, my lord. Not an hour after he seemed to be recovering well, Osric explained, his voice tight with concern. I do not believe this stems from the original poison itself. The substance found in the wine was designed to act quickly, and would have run its course by now, one way or another. I suspect instead that something entered his system a second time. Edmund felt a cold wave of alarm. You believe someone poisoned him again, here, within this very chamber? I cannot yet be certain, my lord, but the pattern of his symptoms suggests it strongly. I have kept a careful watch over his food and drink since the feast, yet I cannot account for every moment, particularly during the hours I rested last night. Alaric stirred weakly, his eyes fluttering open, unfocused at first, before settling on Edmund's face. Duke Hartley, he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Something is not right. I remember drinking a small cup of broth this morning, brought by a servant I did not recognize clearly through my weakened state. Edmund leaned closer. Can you describe this servant? A man, taller than most, wearing the plain garments of the kitchen staff, though something about his manner seemed unfamiliar. I did not think to question it at the time, given my condition. Edmund straightened and turned to Osric. Who among the kitchen staff has access to this chamber? Only those specifically assigned to prepare meals for the recovering, my lord. A small group I trust well, having worked alongside them for years. None match the description Lord Fenwick provides. A chill settled over Edmund as the implications became clear. Someone had entered this chamber, disguised as household staff, delivering a second dose, intended to finish what the first attempt at the feast had failed to accomplish. This was no longer a matter of a single reckless act during a moment of chaos. This was a deliberate, ongoing effort to see Alaric Fenwick dead, carried out with patience and careful planning. Double the guards outside this chamber immediately, Edmund ordered, and allow no one entry without my direct permission, including staff you believe familiar. I will not risk another attempt on his life. As guards hurried to comply, Edmund's mind turned rapidly through the new information. If the poisoning had continued, even while Eleanor remained locked away in the West Tower, unable to move freely through the castle, then surely this proved beyond doubt that she could not be responsible for this second attempt. The timing alone spoke clearly in her favor. Yet he knew Godfrey would find some way to argue around even this fact, suggesting perhaps that Eleanor had arranged for an accomplice to continue her supposed scheme from within her confinement. The thought exhausted him. How deeply had suspicion already poisoned the reasoning of the entire court, that even clear evidence could be twisted into further accusation. Osric worked through the afternoon to stabilize Alaric's condition, using various remedies and careful monitoring to counter whatever substance had entered his system. By evening, the Lord's fever had begun to break, and his breathing steadied enough that Osric allowed himself a cautious sigh of relief. He will recover, my lord, though this second attempt has weakened him considerably. I recommend he remain under constant watch until we are certain no further attempts will follow. Edmund nodded grimly and left the physician to his work, making his way instead toward Roland Finch's quarters to demand an update on the investigation into Lord Ashby's servant. He found the captain already waiting for him, a folded paper in hand. My lord, I have learned something of significance. The stable hand who mentioned Ashby's servant traveling into the village recalled more details upon further questioning. The servant visited a small apothecary shop known to deal in rare and sometimes dangerous substances, under the pretense of purchasing remedies for his master's supposed ailments. The shopkeeper, when questioned discreetly, confirmed the visit but claimed ignorance of what exactly was purchased, stating only that the transaction was conducted quietly and paid for generously to ensure his silence. This grows more suspicious by the hour, Edmund said. Has anyone confirmed whether this same servant entered the guest chamber today, disguised among the kitchen staff? I have not yet confirmed this directly, my lord, though I intend to question the kitchen staff immediately to determine whether any unfamiliar face was noticed among them this morning. Do so at once, and report back to me the moment you learn anything further. As Roland departed once more, Edmund found himself standing alone in the darkening corridor, the weight of the day's events pressing heavily upon him. He thought again of Eleanor, still confined within the West Tower, enduring hours of uncertainty, while her husband chased shadows through the castle in search of truth. He could delay no longer. Whatever the court might think, whatever whispers might follow, he needed to see her, to speak with her honestly, and to begin repairing the trust his own doubt had damaged. He made his way toward the West Tower, informing the guards stationed there that he wished to enter alone. They stepped aside without question, and Edmund unlocked the door himself, stepping into the modest chamber where his wife had spent the entire day in isolation. Eleanor rose from where she sat near the window, her expression guarded, though something in her eyes softened slightly at the sight of him. "Edmund, I did not expect you. I should have come sooner," he admitted, closing the door behind him. "Eleanor, I have learned of the note you wrote to Aldous, warning him of a stranger near the cellar." Margaret confirmed it, and Aldous as well, though the note itself has since been lost. "Why did you not tell me of this yourself?" The moment Godfrey made his accusations, Eleanor's composure wavered slightly, the strain of the day finally showing through. "Everything happened so quickly, Edmund. By the time my thoughts cleared enough to remember the note, you had already ordered my confinement, and I feared that speaking of it then, without proof, would seem only like a desperate excuse invented after the fact." "I understand that fear better than you might think," Edmund said quietly. "I have spent this entire day torn between the evidence Godfrey presents and the wife I have known and trusted for 5 years. I do not wish to fail you, Eleanor, yet I also cannot ignore the responsibility I carry toward this household and our alliance with the Fenwick family." "Then believe me when I say, I saw a stranger near that cellar, days before the feast, and that I warned Aldous, out of genuine concern, not calculation. I would never harm Alaric, nor anyone under this roof. You know this, Edmund, in your heart, even if your mind struggles against the weight of what others whisper." Edmund studied her face for a long moment, searching for any trace of deception, and finding none, only weariness and quiet hurt. "Alaric was poisoned a second time today, while you remained locked within this very tower. Whatever else remains uncertain, this at least proves you could not have acted alone in whatever continues to threaten his life." Relief flickered across Eleanor's features, quickly followed by fresh concern. "Poisoned again? Is he alive?" "He survives, though weakened further. Osric believes someone entered his chamber, disguised among the kitchen staff, and Roland has uncovered evidence suggesting Lord Ashby's servant may have purchased dangerous substances from a village apothecary in the days before the feast." "Cedric Ashby," Eleanor murmured, her brow furrowing in thought. "I have exchanged only pleasant words with him since his arrival, yet something in his manner has always struck me as somewhat distant, calculated even, though I dismissed it as simply a reserved temperament." "Perhaps your instincts served you better than you realized," Edmund said. "I intend to continue this investigation until the truth is fully uncovered, whatever it may cost. And Eleanor, I promise you this. I will not allow suspicion to condemn you, while the true culprit remains free to threaten more lives." Eleanor reached out and took his hand, her fingers cool against his own. "Thank you, Edmund. I have missed your trust these past hours more than I can properly express." He lifted her hand gently to his lips, a small gesture of reconciliation between them, though both understood that true trust would require more than words alone to fully restore. As Edmund left the tower that evening, his resolve had hardened into something unshakable. He would uncover every thread of this conspiracy, expose Cedric Ashby's involvement if the evidence proved true, and clear his wife's name before the entire court, regardless of how long the effort required or how many powerful enemies he might make in the process. Yet even as he descended the tower stairs, his thoughts turning toward the next steps of the investigation, he remained unaware that Cedric Ashby, sensing the net beginning to close around him, had already begun preparing his next move, one that would place the entire household in far greater danger than anyone yet realized. Morning brought fresh tension to Ravenswood Castle, as word spread quietly among the household staff that Lord Fenwick had suffered a second brush with death. Though Edmund had ordered the details kept as quiet as possible, servants noticed the increased number of guards stationed near the guest chamber, and whispers traveled through the kitchens and corridors, regardless of any attempt at secrecy. Captain Roland Finch arrived at the study early, his expression grim as he laid out the results of his questioning from the previous evening. "My lord, I have spoken with every member of the kitchen staff assigned to prepare meals for Lord Fenwick. None recognized the servant he described delivering the broth yesterday morning. Furthermore, one of the cooks recalled seeing an unfamiliar man near the kitchen entrance around that same hour, though she assumed him to be a guest of one of the visiting lords and thought little of it at the time. Did she provide any further description?" "Only that he was tall, with dark hair, and wore garments similar enough to household staff that he did not draw immediate suspicion, though something about his bearing struck her as unusual, more refined than one would expect from ordinary kitchen help. This matches the vague description Alaric himself provided. Someone deliberately disguised themselves to gain access to his chamber. Has anyone confirmed whether Lord Ashby's servant matches this description? I have made inquiries, my lord, though carefully, so as not to alert Ashby himself to our suspicions. His personal servant, a man named Perkins, is indeed tall with dark hair, and has been seen moving through the castle at unusual hours since his arrival. Bring Perkins to me for questioning, quietly, without alerting his master. Roland hesitated. My lord, if we move against the servant directly, Ashby may grow suspicious and attempt to flee before we gather sufficient proof of his own involvement. Might it serve us better to continue watching both men closely for now, gathering further evidence before revealing our suspicions? Edmund considered this counsel carefully. Roland's caution made sense. Moving too quickly against Ashby without solid proof could allow the true architect of this scheme to escape entirely, especially if he held greater influence or resources than his household position suggested. Yet delay carried its own risks, particularly with Alaric's life still hanging in uncertain balance.
Very well. Continue watching them both, but increase the guard around Lord Fenwick further still, and ensure that no unfamiliar face enters his chamber under any circumstance, regardless of how convincing their explanation might sound.
As Roland departed to strengthen the watch, Edmund turned his attention to Godfrey Pruitt, who had requested an audience that morning to discuss what he termed pressing matters concerning the ongoing investigation. The Chancellor entered the study with his usual measured composure, though Edmund had begun to notice small inconsistencies in the man's careful presentation, details that had not troubled him before, but now seemed worth closer examination. My Lord Duke, Godfrey began, the court grows restless with uncertainty. Many nobles who witnessed the events of the feast now demand swifter justice, particularly given the news that Lord Fenwick suffered a further attempt upon his life yesterday. Some suggest that the Duchess's continued confinement proves insufficient, and that stronger measures may be required to satisfy the concerns of our allies. What stronger measures do you suggest, Godfrey? Perhaps a formal trial before the full court, my lord, to settle the matter definitively, one way or another. Edmund studied the Chancellor carefully. A trial requires evidence, Godfrey. Not merely suspicion, born from servants who noticed the Duchess standing near a cellar she has visited countless times throughout our marriage. Tell me, who first brought these observations to your attention? Godfrey's composure flickered, almost imperceptibly, before smoothing over once more. Several members of the household staff approached me independently, my lord, concerned by what they had witnessed. Independently, you say? Yet it seems curious that so many separate accounts arrived at your attention within such a short span of time, all pointing toward the same conclusion. My lord, I only report what has been brought to me. I make no claims of my own regarding the Duchess's guilt or innocence. And yet your words at the feast carried the weight of accusation, whether intended or not, Edmund replied, his tone growing sharper. I begin to wonder, Godfrey, whether your concern for justice runs as pure as you present it, or whether some other motive guides your eagerness to see my wife condemned. Godfrey's face paled slightly, though he recovered his composure with practiced ease. My lord, I assure you, my only concern is the stability of this household and the preservation of your alliance with the Fenwick family. I would never act against the Duchess out of any personal motive. See that you do not, Edmund said coldly. I intend to uncover the truth of this matter fully, and I will not tolerate any further attempts to steer that investigation through whispers and careful suggestion rather than honest evidence. You may go. Once Godfrey had departed, Edmund allowed himself a long moment of quiet reflection. Something about the Chancellor's eagerness to press the case against Eleanor had never sat entirely comfortably with him, yet he had allowed the pressures of the moment and the shock of the poisoning to override his own instincts. Now, with clearer evidence beginning to emerge in Eleanor's favor, he found himself questioning not only Godfrey's motives, but the entire chain of assumptions that had led to his wife's confinement in the first place. Later that afternoon, Edmund received word that Alaric Fenwick had recovered sufficient strength to receive a brief visit, and he made his way to the guest chamber to check on the Lord's condition personally. He found Alaric propped against several pillows, pale but alert, Osric hovering nearby with careful attention. Duke Hartley, Alaric said, his voice still somewhat weak, but steadier than the previous day. I understand my continued survival owes much to your physician's skill and to the increased vigilance of your guards. I am relieved to see you recovering, Alaric. I regret deeply that this occurred beneath my own roof, during a feast meant to honor our friendship rather than threaten your life. You bear no fault in this matter, Edmund. Whoever seeks to harm me acts with deliberate cunning that no host could reasonably have anticipated. Alaric paused, studying Edmund's face carefully. I understand the Duchess remains under suspicion for this affair. She does, though I have begun to uncover evidence that suggests her innocence rather than her guilt. She wrote a warning note to my wine steward days before the feast, cautioning him about a stranger she had noticed near the cellar entrance. Both the steward and a maid have confirmed the existence of this note, though the note itself has since been lost. Alaric's expression grew thoughtful. This aligns with something I have been considering myself. I have known Cedric Ashby for several years, as he is a distant relation through my mother's side of the family. I have always found him pleasant enough company, though something about his manner has occasionally struck me as calculating, particularly regarding matters of inheritance and family standing. Edmund leaned forward with interest. Inheritance? What do you mean? Cedric stands to inherit a modest but respectable estate from an aging relative, one that my own family has some claim to as well, through a complicated arrangement made 2 generations ago. Should something happen to me, particularly under circumstances that cast suspicion elsewhere, certain legal complications might resolve in Cedric's favor regarding this disputed inheritance. Edmund felt a chill of understanding settle over him. You believe Cedric orchestrated this poisoning, not out of any grievance against you personally, but to resolve a matter of inheritance, using my household and my wife as convenient cover for his true intentions. I cannot say with certainty, Edmund, but the possibility has weighed on my mind since I first began to recover my senses. Cedric arrived at this feast as my traveling companion, a courtesy I extended without hesitation, never suspecting that he might use the occasion to further his own ambitions at my expense. Edmund thanked Alaric for this crucial insight, and left the chamber with his mind racing through the new implications. If Cedric Ashby had indeed poisoned Alaric to resolve a dispute over inheritance, then framing the Duchess would serve as the perfect distraction, drawing attention away from his own motives, while the court's suspicion fell instead upon an innocent woman with no true connection to the crime at all. He needed proof, something concrete enough to expose Ashby's scheme before the full court, particularly given Godfrey's apparent eagerness to see Eleanor condemned, regardless of the truth. As Edmund made his way back toward the study to consult further with Roland Finch, he resolved that the coming days would require both patience and careful strategy, lest Cedric Ashby sense the danger closing around him and flee before justice could be properly served. Cedric Ashby stood at the window of his guest chamber, watching the courtyard below where guards moved with a diligence that had grown noticeably sharper over the past 2 days. He had noticed the increased attention around Lord Fenwick's chamber, the questions circulating quietly among the household staff, and the careful, measured way Captain Finch had begun observing his own movements whenever their paths crossed within the castle corridors. He was not a foolish man. He understood that suspicion, once stirred, rarely settled quickly, and he sensed that his window of opportunity was closing faster than he had anticipated when he first devised this scheme. The plan had seemed elegant in its simplicity when he first conceived it months earlier, upon learning that the aging relative whose estate he stood to inherit had fallen gravely ill. Should Alaric Fenwick die under circumstances that cast suspicion elsewhere, the disputed inheritance would resolve cleanly in Cedric's favor, free from the legal complications that had troubled the family for 2 generations. Framing the Duchess had seemed a stroke of fortunate timing, rather than deliberate planning. He had noticed her presence near the wine cellar quite by accident on the night before the feast, and the opportunity to plant suspicion in that direction, using vials hidden behind the crates, had presented itself almost too easily to ignore. Yet now, with Alaric surviving both attempts on his life, and the household growing increasingly vigilant, Cedric found his carefully constructed plan beginning to unravel at the edges. He summoned his servant Perkins to his chamber with quiet urgency. "We must be careful in the coming days," Cedric said, keeping his voice low despite the empty room around them. "The guards watch us more closely than before. Have you noticed anything that suggests they suspect our involvement directly?" "Nothing certain, my lord," Perkins replied, though his own nervousness betrayed itself in the slight tremor of his hands. Though I confess the increased attention troubles me greatly. Perhaps we should consider departing the castle before matters grow worse. Departing now would only confirm whatever suspicions they harbor, Cedric said sharply. We must remain calm, and continue as though nothing troubles us. Lord Fenwick has survived twice now, which frustrates our purpose considerably. But perhaps a more patient approach will yet succeed, where haste has failed. My lord, might I suggest we abandon this scheme entirely? The risk grows too great, and I fear the consequences, should we be discovered. Cedric's expression hardened. The inheritance at stake is worth considerable risk, Perkins. I did not come this far to abandon the effort now, simply because our first attempts proved less than perfectly executed. We shall wait for a more opportune moment, when the household's vigilance naturally relaxes, as it inevitably will once enough time passes without further incident. Perkins said nothing further, though the doubt remained plain upon his face as he departed to attend to his usual duties, his mind clearly troubled by the direction his master's ambitions continued to take. Meanwhile, within the West Tower, Eleanor received an unexpected visitor that afternoon. Alaric Fenwick, still weak but determined, had insisted upon being carried by 2 attendants to speak with the Duchess directly, despite Osric's protests that he required further rest before undertaking such exertion. My lady, Alaric said once the attendants had helped him into a chair near Eleanor's writing desk. I owe you an apology, though we have barely exchanged more than polite pleasantries since my arrival at this castle. Eleanor regarded him with surprise. An apology, my lord? I have done nothing that requires such words from you. Your husband informed me of the note you wrote, warning your steward of a stranger near the cellar. I believe now that whoever sought to harm me used your presence there as convenient cover for their own scheme, and I fear that my own traveling companion may bear responsibility for this entire affair. Eleanor's eyes widened. You suspect Lord Ashby? I do, though I have shared this suspicion only with Edmund thus far. Cedric stands to gain considerably from my death, through matters of inheritance that have troubled our extended family for years. I did not wish to believe such treachery possible from a man I have known since childhood, yet the evidence accumulating against him grows difficult to dismiss. Eleanor considered this carefully, her mind turning back to the stranger she had glimpsed near the cellar entrance, days before the feast. The man I saw that evening wore a traveling cloak I did not recognize as belonging to our household staff. Could this have been Lord Ashby's servant, perhaps scouting the cellar in advance of the feast? It seems entirely possible, my lady. I only wish I had recognized Cedric's capacity for such treachery sooner, before this scheme placed both my life and your reputation in such grave danger. You need not carry that burden alone, my lord. None of us could have anticipated such calculated betrayal from someone within our own circle of trust. Alaric managed a weak smile. Your generosity of spirit speaks well of the character my traveling companion sought to falsely accuse. I intend to speak with Edmund again, once I have rested further, to discuss how we might gather the proof necessary to expose Cedric's involvement before the full court. After Alaric's attendants had carried him back to his own chamber, Eleanor sat alone with her thoughts, a mixture of relief and renewed determination settling over her. If Alaric himself now believed in her innocence, and suspected Cedric Ashby of orchestrating this entire scheme, then surely the truth would emerge before much longer, regardless of Godfrey's continued efforts to paint her as guilty. Yet the confinement continued to weigh upon her, each day within these tower walls, stretching longer than the last, and she found herself longing not merely for freedom, but for the restoration of the trust between herself and Edmund that this ordeal had so severely tested. Elsewhere in the castle, Roland Finch continued his careful surveillance of Cedric Ashby and his servant, noting every movement with meticulous attention. That evening, he observed Perkins slipping away from the main household once more, this time heading not toward the village, but toward the castle's old storage buildings near the eastern wall, structures rarely used since the household had constructed newer facilities closer to the main hall years earlier. Curious and cautious, Roland followed at a careful distance, watching as Perkins entered one of the abandoned storage buildings and remained inside for nearly half an hour before emerging and hurrying back toward the main castle grounds. Once certain the servant had gone, Roland approached the building himself, searching carefully through the dim evening light until he discovered, tucked behind a loose stone in the far wall, a small collection of vials matching those found in the wine cellar, along with several folded papers, written in a hand Roland did not immediately recognize. His pulse quickening, With the significance of this discovery, Roland gathered the evidence carefully and made his way directly to the Duke's study, understanding that whatever these papers contained might finally provide the concrete proof needed to expose Cedric Ashby's treachery before the entire court, and to clear the Duchess's name once and for all. Edmund unfolded the papers Roland had brought him, with careful hands, spreading them across the study desk beneath the glow of a single candle. The handwriting was unfamiliar, cramped, and hurried in places, as though written quickly and without much concern for neatness. As he read through the contents, his expression shifted from cautious curiosity to something far darker. "My lord," Roland said quietly, watching the Duke's face, "what do the papers reveal?" "They appear to be letters exchanged between Cedric Ashby and someone he refers to only as his associate, discussing arrangements regarding an inheritance dispute and referencing a plan to remove an obstacle standing in the way of a favorable resolution." Edmund's jaw tightened as he continued reading. One letter mentions specifically the acquisition of a rare substance from a source in the Southern Territories, describing it as suitable for resolving matters quietly and without suspicion falling upon the sender. "This matches precisely what we suspected of Ashby's servant and his journey to the village apothecary," Roland said. "Does the letter name Lord Fenwick directly?" "Not by name, though the references to inheritance and family estate leave little room for alternative interpretation, particularly given what Alaric himself shared with me earlier today." Edmund set the papers down and rubbed his tired eyes. "This is damning evidence, Roland, yet I fear it may not prove sufficient on its own. Ashby could claim these letters were forged, or that they refer to some entirely different matter unrelated to the poisoning." "There is more, my lord," Roland said, producing a small vial from within his coat. "I found this alongside the papers, matching exactly the residue Osric identified in the wine that first poisoned Lord Fenwick. If we can connect this vial directly to Ashby's possession, along with the letters discussing the substance's acquisition, the combination should prove difficult for even the most skilled defense to dismiss entirely." Edmund nodded slowly, though his mind continued working through the implications. "We must move carefully, Roland. If we confront Ashby too directly before gathering every possible thread of proof, he may find some way to escape justice, or shift blame elsewhere once again. I wish to present this evidence before the full court, alongside Alaric's own testimony regarding the inheritance dispute, in a manner that leaves no reasonable doubt remaining." As Edmund continued studying the letters late into the evening, determined to understand every detail before confronting Ashby directly, his thoughts turned unexpectedly toward Eleanor, and the note she claimed to have written days before the feast, warning Aldous of the stranger near the cellar. Though Aldous and Margaret had both confirmed its existence through their testimony, the note itself remained lost, a gap in the evidence that continued to trouble him despite the growing case building against Ashby. Restless and unable to set the matter aside, Edmund found himself climbing the stairs toward Eleanor's private chambers, the ones she had occupied before her confinement to the West Tower, thinking perhaps that some trace of the note, or her original intentions, might yet be found among her personal belongings, something that might strengthen the case for her innocence, beyond mere spoken testimony alone. He entered the chamber quietly, the space familiar and comforting despite the circumstances that had led him there. Eleanor's writing desk sat near the window, exactly as he remembered it, papers and personal items arranged with the careful order she always maintained in her private affairs. Edmund began searching through the desk drawers, uncertain exactly what he hoped to find, yet unwilling to abandon the search until he had exhausted every possibility. In the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of letters from her family and several pressed flowers, kept as sentimental keepsakes, Edmund's fingers brushed against a folded piece of paper, tucked carefully into the drawer's corner, as though placed there for safekeeping, and perhaps forgotten in the chaos that followed the feast. He drew it out carefully and unfolded it beneath the candlelight, his heart quickening as he recognized Eleanor's careful handwriting. The note read exactly as Aldous and Margaret had described, a clear and specific warning, dated 3 days before the feast, describing a stranger seen lingering near the cellar entrance, and instructing the steward to inspect the wine barrels carefully before serving them to the assembled guests. Edmund realized immediately that this must be a second copy, perhaps written as a draft before the final version had been delivered to Aldous, kept here among her personal papers as a matter of habit, rather than deliberate planning. He sat down heavily in the chair beside the desk, staring at the note in his hands, understanding fully now what its discovery meant. Eleanor had suspected danger and attempted to prevent it, days before the poisoning ever occurred, at a time when she could have had no possible motive to fabricate such a warning for her own future defense. This was not evidence created after the fact to escape suspicion. This was genuine, timely concern for the safety of a guest she barely knew, expressed through quiet, careful action, rather than public declaration. Shame washed over Edmund as he considered how quickly he had allowed doubt to take root in his heart, how readily he had accepted Godfrey's careful insinuations over the character of a wife who had never given him reason to distrust her in 5 years of marriage. He had been so consumed by the pressures of leadership, so eager to appear decisive before a court still uncertain of his authority after months away at war, that he had failed to extend to Eleanor the same trust she had always shown him. Folding the note carefully and placing it within his coat for safekeeping, Edmund resolved that he would present this evidence to the full court, alongside the case against Cedric Ashby, ensuring that Eleanor's innocence would be established not merely through the absence of proof against her, but through clear, undeniable evidence of her genuine concern for the household's safety. He made his way immediately toward the West Tower, unable to wait until morning to share this discovery with his wife. The guard stepped aside without question as he approached, and he unlocked the door himself, finding Eleanor still awake despite the late hour, sitting near the window as she so often did during her confinement, watching the darkened courtyard below. "Edmund," she said, rising in surprise at his unexpected arrival. "What brings you here at such an hour?" He said nothing at first, simply crossing the room and placing the folded note gently into her hands. Eleanor's brow furrowed in confusion as she unfolded it, and then her expression shifted to recognition and quiet astonishment. "Where did you find this?" "In your writing desk, among your personal letters. I believe it must be a draft you kept before delivering the final copy to Aldous." Edmund's voice grew thick with emotion he had not allowed himself to fully feel until this moment. "Eleanor, I am deeply sorry for the doubt I allowed to take hold within me these past days. This note proves beyond any question that you suspected danger, and sought to prevent it, long before anyone could have accused you of anything at all." Tears gathered in Eleanor's eyes, though whether from relief, lingering hurt, or some combination of both, Edmund could not entirely tell. "I feared this proof might never surface, that I would remain condemned by whispers and suspicion regardless of the truth." "That will not happen," Edmund said firmly, taking her hands in his own. "I intend to present this evidence before the full court, alongside proof I have gathered against Cedric Ashby, whose scheme this entire tragedy appears to be. You will be vindicated, Eleanor, and I will ensure that everyone who doubted you understands fully how wrong their suspicions proved to be." For the first time since her confinement began, Eleanor allowed herself to believe fully that this ordeal might finally be nearing its end, though she understood that confronting Ashby directly and convincing the assembled court of his guilt beyond any reasonable doubt would require careful preparation and perhaps one final, decisive confrontation before justice could truly be served. By morning, Edmund had gathered every piece of evidence uncovered over the past several days and arranged for a formal assembly of the full court to take place that very afternoon within the Great Hall, the same room where the poisoning had first occurred. He sent word to Alaric Fenwick, requesting that the Lord attend if his strength allowed, and instructed Roland Finch to ensure that Cedric Ashby received a formal invitation as well, framed as a routine gathering to discuss the ongoing investigation, rather than a direct confrontation that might prompt him to flee beforehand. Eleanor remained in the West Tower through the morning hours, though Edmund visited her briefly to confirm that she would be brought before the court that afternoon, no longer as a prisoner facing accusation, but as the woman whose innocence he intended to prove beyond any lingering doubt. "Are you prepared for this, Eleanor?" Edmund asked, studying her face carefully. "I have waited days for the chance to speak the truth before those who so quickly believed the worst of me," Eleanor replied, her voice steady, despite the tension evident in her posture. "I am more than prepared, Edmund. I only hope the evidence you have gathered proves sufficient to convince even the most stubborn among the court." "It will," Edmund said with quiet confidence. "I have seen to that personally." That afternoon, the great hall filled once more with nobles and household staff, the atmosphere thick with anticipation, as word had spread that the Duke intended to reveal significant developments in the poisoning investigation. Godfrey Pruitt stood near the front of the assembly, his expression carefully neutral, though Edmund noticed a flicker of unease cross the Chancellor's face as guards escorted Eleanor into the hall, her head held high despite the whispers that followed her entrance. Cedric Ashby arrived shortly after, accompanied by his servant Perkins, taking a position among the other nobles with an air of calm indifference that Edmund suspected concealed considerable inner tension. Alaric Fenwick followed, still weak but determined to attend, supported by 2 attendants who helped him into a chair positioned near the front of the assembly. Once the hall had settled, Edmund stepped forward to address the gathered court, his voice carrying clearly across the silent room. 5 days ago, during a feast meant to celebrate peace and friendship, someone within this household attempted to murder our honored guest, Lord Alaric Fenwick. In the confusion that followed, suspicion fell upon my wife, the Duchess Eleanor, based on circumstantial observations and careful insinuation rather than genuine evidence. He paused, letting his words settle over the assembled nobles before continuing. I confess that I myself allowed doubt to take root during those first difficult hours, a failing I deeply regret and intend to correct fully before this court today. Edmund produced the note he had discovered in Eleanor's writing desk, holding it aloft for the assembly to see. This note, written in my wife's own hand, 3 days before the feast, warns our wine steward of a stranger she observed near the cellar entrance, instructing him to inspect the barrels carefully before serving our guests. Both the steward Aldous and the maid Margaret have confirmed under questioning that such a warning was indeed delivered before the feast ever took place, at a time when the Duchess could have had no possible reason to fabricate evidence in her own defense. Murmurs rippled through the hall as Edmund's words sank in. He continued, turning his attention now toward Cedric Ashby, who shifted slightly in his seat, his composed expression beginning to show faint cracks of concern. Further investigation has revealed that the stranger my wife observed near the cellar may well have been connected to a scheme far more calculated than anyone initially suspected. Captain Finch, please share what you discovered in the old storage building near the eastern wall. Roland stepped forward, producing the vials and letters he had found. My Lord Duke, these papers contain correspondence discussing the acquisition of a rare poison from the Southern Territories, along with references to an inheritance dispute and a plan to remove an obstacle standing in the way of a favorable resolution. The vial found alongside these letters matches precisely the substance identified by our physician in the wine that first poisoned Lord Fenwick. The hall erupted into startled whispers, and Edmund raised his hand for silence before continuing. These letters were discovered hidden within a storage building that Lord Ashby's servant Perkins was observed visiting under cover of darkness. Lord Fenwick himself has confirmed that Lord Ashby stands to inherit a disputed estate should certain circumstances arise, circumstances that would resolve favorably in Ashby's direction should Lord Fenwick meet an untimely end, under conditions that cast suspicion elsewhere. All eyes in the hall turned towards Cedric Ashby, whose face had grown noticeably pale, despite his continued attempts to maintain an air of calm composure. This is absurd, Ashby said, his voice carrying less confidence than his words intended. I know nothing of these letters, or this alleged scheme. Perhaps someone seeks to frame me, just as unjustly as the Duchess was framed. Perhaps you would care to explain, then, why your own servant Perkins was witnessed by Captain Finch entering that storage building on multiple occasions, and why the handwriting in these letters bears striking resemblance to correspondence you have exchanged openly with this court on other matters. Edmund replied evenly, producing a separate letter Ashby had sent regarding unrelated household matters weeks earlier, the handwriting clearly matching that found in the incriminating correspondence. Ashby's composure finally began to crumble as murmurs of suspicion grew louder around him. I demand to know who has orchestrated this attempt to destroy my reputation, he said, though his voice lacked the conviction it might once have carried. Alaric Fenwick, gathering his remaining strength, spoke from his seated position near the front of the hall. Cedric, I have known you since childhood, and I did not wish to believe such treachery possible from a man I once considered family. Yet the evidence speaks clearly enough, and your servant's own nervous behavior these past days has done little to support your claims of innocence. Perkins, standing near his master, had grown visibly agitated throughout the proceedings, his hands trembling and his eyes darting nervously toward the exits, as though calculating some means of escape. Roland Finch, anticipating exactly this reaction, had positioned additional guards near every entrance to the hall, ensuring that neither Ashby nor his servant could flee before the matter reached its conclusion. "Perkins," Edmund said, turning his attention directly toward the servant. "You were observed visiting the storage building, where these letters and vials were discovered. Do you deny this?" Perkins's composure broke entirely under the weight of the assembled court's scrutiny. "My lord, I only did as my master instructed. I never wished to see anyone truly harmed, only followed the orders given to me." "Silence, Perkins," Ashby hissed. Though the damage had already been done, the servant's words serving as effective confirmation of the scheme's existence before the entire gathered court. Edmund turned back toward Ashby, his expression hard with the weight of authority. "Cedric Ashby, the evidence before this court proves clearly enough that you orchestrated a scheme to poison Lord Alaric Fenwick, using his invitation as your traveling companion to gain access to this household, and using my own wife's innocent presence near the cellar as convenient cover for your treachery. What say you now in your own defense?" The hall fell into tense, expectant silence as every eye turned toward Cedric Ashby, waiting to see whether he would continue to deny the mounting evidence against him, or whether the weight of exposure would finally force the truth from his lips before the entire assembled court of Ravenswood. Cedric Ashby stood in the center of the great hall, surrounded on all sides by the weight of accusation and the silent judgment of the assembled court. For a long moment, he said nothing, his eyes darting between Edmund's unwavering gaze, Alaric's weakened but resolute expression, and the guards positioned firmly at every exit, leaving no possibility of escape from the truth now closing in around him. "You do not understand the pressures I have faced," Ashby finally said, his voice low and strained, all pretense of calm indifference abandoned entirely. "The estate in question has belonged to my family's rightful claim for generations. Yet through complicated legal arrangements made long before my birth, Alaric's branch of the family maintained partial rights that threatened to strip away what should have been mine alone to inherit." "So you chose murder over legal recourse," Edmund said, his voice cold with barely restrained anger. "You endangered the life of a man who considered you family, and you were prepared to let an innocent woman bear the blame for your treachery, simply to secure an inheritance you believed rightfully yours." "I never intended for the Duchess to suffer permanent harm," Ashby protested weakly. "I merely saw an opportunity when I noticed her near the cellar, and I believed the suspicion would pass quickly enough once attention turned elsewhere, long before any lasting consequence could befall her. Yet she remained confined for days, her reputation threatened, before this entire court, while you continued your scheme against Lord Fenwick's life, without any apparent concern for the innocent woman suffering in your place," Edmund replied sharply. "Your servant Perkins entered this castle, disguised among the kitchen staff, to deliver a second dose of poison, nearly succeeding in finishing what your first attempt had failed to accomplish." Ashby's shoulders slumped, the last of his defiance draining away as the full weight of his exposed treachery settled over him. "I acted alone in devising this scheme, my lord. Perkins served only as my instrument, following instructions he did not fully understand, until circumstances had already progressed too far for him to withdraw safely." Perkins, standing nearby under close guard, nodded weakly in confirmation. "My lord, I confess my part in delivering the substances my master required, though I did not devise the scheme myself, nor did I fully understand its ultimate purpose until it was too late to refuse, without endangering myself as well." Alaric Fenwick, still seated near the front of the hall, regarded his former companion with an expression of profound disappointment mixed with lingering sorrow. "Cedric, we grew up together, sharing summers at my family's estate, hunting through the same forests, sharing confidences as young men often do. I never imagined you capable of such calculated betrayal, regardless of whatever dispute existed between our families over that inheritance. The pressures of family expectation weigh heavily, Alaric," Ashby said quietly, though the excuse rang hollow even to his own ears, judging by the shame evident in his downcast gaze. "I allowed ambition to consume better judgment, and I see now the terrible cost of that failing, both to you and to the Duchess, whose reputation I so carelessly endangered for my own gain." Edmund turned toward the assembled court, addressing the gathered nobles directly. "Let it be known throughout this court and beyond that Duchess Eleanor Hartley bears no responsibility whatsoever for the poisoning of Lord Fenwick. The evidence presented today, including her own written warning, delivered days before the feast, proves clearly that she sought to prevent harm rather than cause it. The true architect of this scheme stands before you now, exposed through his own servant's confession and the damning correspondence discovered through careful investigation. A wave of relief and quiet murmurs passed through the assembled nobles, many of whom had whispered accusations against Eleanor in the days following the feast, now shifting uncomfortably as the truth became undeniably clear before them. Godfrey Pruitt, standing near the front of the gathering, had grown increasingly pale throughout the proceedings, understanding perhaps better than most how his own eager insinuations had contributed to the suspicion that nearly condemned an innocent woman. Edmund turned toward the Chancellor directly, his expression hard. "Godfrey, I have my own questions regarding your role in spreading these suspicions so readily throughout the household, gathering testimony that pointed so conveniently toward my wife, rather than pursuing the truth with genuine impartiality. We shall discuss this matter further once today's proceedings have concluded." Godfrey bowed his head slightly, offering no immediate defense, though the tension in his posture suggested he understood the seriousness of the accusation now turned toward his own conduct. "As for you, Cedric Ashby," Edmund continued, turning back toward the disgraced lord, "you shall be held within this castle, under close guard, until proper arrangements can be made, to deliver you before the appropriate authorities to answer fully for your crimes. Your attempt to murder Lord Fenwick, and your willingness to see an innocent woman condemned in your place, shall not go unpunished." Guards moved forward to escort Ashby and Perkins from the hall, the disgraced lord offering no further resistance, his earlier composure entirely replaced by the weary resignation of a man who understood that his careful scheme had finally, completely unraveled before those he had sought to deceive. Once the guards had removed both men from the hall, Edmund turned toward Eleanor, who stood quietly near the center of the assembly, her expression a careful mixture of relief and lingering exhaustion from the ordeal she had endured. He crossed the distance between them and took her hands in his own, addressing not only her, but the entire assembled court. "Let this day serve as testament to the character of my wife, Duchess Eleanor Hartley, whose quiet courage and genuine concern for this household's safety very nearly went unrecognized amid suspicion and careless accusation. I failed her during these difficult days, allowing doubt to cloud judgment that should have remained steady and true. I intend to spend considerable effort restoring the trust my own uncertainty damaged, and I ask that this court extend to her the same respect and honor she has always deserved as mistress of this household." Eleanor's eyes glistened with emotion as she looked upon her husband, the assembled court, and the long ordeal that had finally reached its resolution. "Thank you, Edmund, for pursuing the truth so diligently, even when circumstances made that pursuit difficult and uncertain. I hold no anger toward this court for the suspicion I endured, only relief that justice has finally been served, and gratitude that those who doubted me now understand the truth clearly." As the assembly began to disperse, small groups of nobles approaching Eleanor to offer quiet apologies for their earlier suspicions, Edmund found himself reflecting on the profound lessons this ordeal had taught him about trust, doubt, and the careful diligence required to distinguish genuine truth from convenient assumption, lessons he intended to carry with him throughout the remainder of his rule as Duke of Ravenswood. In the weeks that followed the confrontation in the Great Hall, life at Ravenswood Castle slowly returned to a sense of normalcy, though the events of that turbulent period left lasting changes upon everyone touched by the affair. Cedric Ashby was transferred under heavy guard to the proper authorities responsible for judging crimes of his severity, his fate no longer a concern of the Ravenswood household, though word eventually reached the castle that the disputed inheritance he had so desperately sought was instead awarded entirely to Alaric Fenwick's family, the court's ruling that Ashby's treachery forfeited any legitimate claim he might once have held. Perkins, whose cooperation had proven valuable in exposing his master's full scheme, received a lighter judgment than Ashby himself, though he too faced consequences for his role in delivering the poison that had nearly claimed Alaric's life. Godfrey Pruitt, whose eager pursuit of suspicion against Eleanor had contributed significantly to her suffering during those difficult days, found his position within the household considerably diminished. Edmund, after careful consideration, chose not to remove the Chancellor entirely from his duties, recognizing that ambition and poor judgment while serious failings differed considerably from the deliberate malice Ashby had shown. Yet Godfrey understood clearly that his influence within the court had been permanently altered, and he conducted himself with noticeably greater caution and humility in the months that followed. Alaric Fenwick remained at Ravenswood for several additional weeks, as his strength gradually returned under Osric's continued care. During this time, a genuine friendship developed between Alaric and the Hartley household, one built upon mutual respect and shared understanding of the ordeal they had endured together. Before his eventual departure, Alaric expressed his gratitude to Eleanor personally, acknowledging the courage she had shown throughout her confinement and the genuine concern that had led her to warn the wine steward in the first place. Concern that, had it been heeded more carefully, might have prevented the entire crisis from unfolding as severely as it did. "You showed remarkable strength throughout this ordeal, my lady," Alaric told her during his final visit, before returning to his own family estate. "Many in your position might have grown bitter or resentful toward those who doubted them so readily, yet you have shown only grace and quiet dignity throughout this difficult chapter." "I could not have endured it so well without Edmund's eventual diligence in uncovering the truth," Eleanor replied, "nor without the loyalty of those within this household who never wavered in their belief of my innocence, regardless of what others whispered around them." As for Edmund and Eleanor themselves, the ordeal had tested their marriage in ways neither had anticipated, yet ultimately it strengthened the bond between them through the honest reckoning it demanded of them both. Edmund made it a point, in the months following Ashby's exposure, to consult Eleanor more openly on matters concerning the household and its governance, recognizing in her the same careful wisdom and quiet strength that had led her to notice danger where others had not, and to act upon that concern even without certainty of its significance. "I have learned something valuable through this difficult experience," Edmund told her one evening, several months after the events at the feast had finally settled into memory rather than immediate crisis. "I learned that true partnership requires trust, extended even during moments of uncertainty, not merely during times when belief comes easily. I failed to extend you that trust when you needed it most, and I intend to spend the remainder of our marriage ensuring you never again doubt my faith in your character." Eleanor took his hand gently, her expression warm with the affection that had only deepened through the trials they had faced together. "We have both learned much through this ordeal, Edmund. I understand now the pressures you faced as a leader, still finding his footing after months away at war, surrounded by voices eager to guide your judgment toward their own purposes. I hold no lasting resentment for the doubt you briefly harbored, only gratitude that you ultimately sought the truth so diligently, and restored my honor before this entire court once that truth became clear." The wine cellar itself underwent renovation in the months that followed, new locks and careful oversight established to prevent any similar breach of security from occurring again. Aldous, the young steward whose nervous testimony had proven so crucial in uncovering the truth, received a promotion within the household staff, recognized for his honesty and careful attention, despite the frightening circumstances he had found himself caught within. Margaret, too, earned particular favor from both the Duke and Duchess for her loyal service and willingness to speak truthfully when questioned, regardless of the pressure surrounding the investigation. As seasons changed and the memory of that turbulent feast gradually softened into a story told with careful reflection rather than immediate fear, Ravenswood Castle settled into a period of renewed peace and stability. The alliance between the Hartley and Fenwick families, rather than being damaged by the terrible events that had unfolded, grew stronger through the shared trial both households had weathered together, bound by mutual respect, earned through honesty and perseverance, rather than mere convenient circumstance. Eleanor, in particular, found that her standing within the court had shifted considerably from the suspicion she once endured to genuine admiration for the quiet foresight she had shown in warning of danger before anyone else had recognized its presence. Nobles who had once whispered accusations against her now spoke instead of her careful wisdom, her willingness to act upon concern even without certain proof, and the grace with which she had endured unjust suspicion without allowing bitterness to consume her spirit. On quiet evenings, when the business of governing the household had settled and the castle grew peaceful beneath the gathering dusk, Edmund and Eleanor often walked together through the same gardens where they had first grown close as young newlyweds. Their conversation, now carrying the deeper understanding that only genuine trial and eventual reconciliation could provide. The poisoned wine that had once threatened to destroy their household through suspicion and doubt had, in the end, revealed instead the true strength of character each of them possessed, and the resilience of a marriage built upon foundations far sturdier than any single moment of uncertainty could ever hope to shatter. And so the story of Ravenswood Castle settled into memory, not as a tale of betrayal and suspicion alone, but as a testament to the courage of a woman who spoke the truth, even when no one wished to listen, and the eventual wisdom of a husband who chose, in the end, to seek that truth diligently, rather than accept the convenient assumptions others had so eagerly pressed upon him.